Welcome to Theo Faith, and pray you had a great weekend, a great Lord's Day yesterday, and that you are ready for a new week and ready to start that week off in worship to the Lord, because we're going to be in Psalm 95 today. Just a really great psalm. Really enjoy that. Hope you're enjoying the Psalms as we go through them this year. You know, I was a little hesitant to do this. Psalms have always been wouldn't say impenetrable for me, but a little hard to get my mind around. So full of emotion, which frankly is not me. You know, I'm an emotional person, but not certainly overwhelmed or overflowing with emotion like some of the psalmists are. It's got such vivid, colorful language, and I'm an engineer by training, and so when I first got into the Psalms, perhaps like you, maybe you noticed it in me, was a little foreign for me, but I've really grown over the year to really love the Psalms, to appreciate the Psalms, to appreciate the artistry, and to see that same artistry reflected in other places in the Bible. And as I've said many times through the series, the Psalms put theology on display. The rest of the Bible kind of explains it, especially the New Testament epistles explain the theology. Other books of the Bible, the prophets, the historical books talk about theology working itself out in history. But what we see in the Psalms is theology lived in people's lives, which is really moving for me. And it's been significant for me and has helped me, I think, to draw closer to the Lord. And I pray for you as well, that He's drawn you close to Himself as well, not only intellectually and volitionally, but emotionally. So let's look at this Psalm, Psalm 95, not very long. It's a short psalm, just 11 verses, as you can see here. And it's really a worship song, a call to worship in a couple of different ways here. And, as I reflect on worship and my own worship practices, sometimes I think that worship has become largely shallow and superficial in a lot of churches. And I think there's two reasons for that. You can agree with me or not, of course. We could still be buddies. But my opinions are that it's become shallow and superficial because we have a pretty high view of ourselves, right? It's hard to worship the Lord as utterly supreme when we have a pretty high view of ourselves. And I think that gets in the way of our worship. We think we're ultimately pretty good. Forget the depravity of our soul and what the Lord has saved us from, the sin that is going to result or would have resulted in our being in conscious eternal torment in hell. We forget about how bad we were, or deny how bad we could possibly be if the Lord was not intruding, I could say, if the Lord was not intervening in our lives in powerful ways. So I think one reason our worship is kind of anemic is we have a pretty high view of ourselves, and at the same time kind of a low view of God. You're an exception. You're in the Word, but for most people in church, they're not spending a lot of time in their Bible. Maybe a day, an hour in the morning, or maybe less, 10 minutes in daily bread or something like that, or a devotional where they're getting one verse. And that's something, I admit that, but not really enough to get a full-orbed picture and understanding of the Lord, and we end up with a kind of a low view of God. So what this psalm does, I think it does two things. It raises God up and calls us to our knees. And that's what we see in this psalm here is verses 1 through 6. We see a call to worship just out of thanksgiving of recognizing all that the Lord has done for us. Just notice this video stream is looking kind of weird. Let me adjust this a little bit. This is real time. So there we go. So I'm my own editor here, so I'm a one-man show, so pay attention to these things. But back to the psalm. I think the first 6 verses call us to worship out of thanksgiving. I mean, if you look at it, sing for joy to the rock, to God of our salvation. I mean, what could be more? What could we be more thankful than for our eternal salvation? Come before His presence. We can come into the very presence of the Lord. You know, this is something that Jesus has made possible for us. We don't have to come with bulls and goats. We don't have to come to a temple with a lamb and cut his neck and offer his blood so that we can be in God's presence. No, Jesus was that lamb for us. Jesus was that sacrificial lamb that paved the way into the Holy of Holies, it says in Hebrews, by His own blood, and He intercedes there for us as our great high priest. So we have that thanksgiving that we can be before Him with psalms. We have these psalms that we're going through that guide and direct our prayer, which is what we'll do today. The Lord's great. He's above all gods. He's created everything. The peaks of the mountains, the depths of the earth, the sea, they're all His. He's formed dry land. I mean, how many things can we catalog? Could we catalog this morning if we just time box ourselves and give us 15 minutes to worship the Lord, and half of that time was just listing the things that we have to be thankful for. Verse 6, I'll come back to that. That's our here verse today, but it has kind of a transition. And we come from thanking God, worship out of thanksgiving, to worship out of fear and reverence, to bow our knee before Him. Why should we bow? We are like the people, the pasture of His sheep. We are like sheep for Him. Recall Psalm 23. He's leading us, He's guiding us, He's caring for us. We think we do so much for ourselves, but it's really God intervening in our lives and leading us and guiding us. Today, the psalmist says, today, if you hear His voice, don't harden your hearts. Today, don't be like in the wilderness where your fathers tested me and tried me. And they were sentenced to the desert for 40 years, and you saw what happened to Israel in 40 years. We should fear God. We should come to Him with a heart full of obedience, not ready to turn away, not hearts that are full of doubt. Not people who err in our hearts. They don't understand God. We do understand Him. They didn't, and God swore in His anger that they should not enter into His rest. So again, we should fear God. We should reverence Him, that He is a stern. He is demanding. You come to the Christian life, don't think you're coming for an easy life. He wants devotion. He wants you to give yourself over to Him. And that brings us to our here verse. Here, of course, is our acronym, highlight, EH, explain, E, apply, and then respond, A and R. So let's look at this verse. Again, it's a transition point, I think, in the psalm. As you read it, you'll see the transition moves from the thanksgiving of verses 1 through 5 to bowing and kneeling before the Lord in verses 6 through 11. So this is the 2 sides of worship: to be thankful, to be grateful, to be fearful, and to be reverent. I love the way it begins here with this word come. Come, a call here, a summons, a call to all. That's how the psalm opened here. Oh, come. And he repeats it, come. I love this because everyone can come. I mean, everyone can respond and can come to Him. You don't need anything. You don't need to bring anything. There's no admission fee. He's not saying come and pay your shekel for the temple. He's not saying come and sacrifice your sheep or your goat or your bull. He's just saying come, just come. You don't need any advanced degrees. You don't need any special insight. No understanding of some secret knowledge that only the elite have. No understanding of some obscure thing in the Bible. Anyone can take that simple step. You can take that simple step today, whether you're looking at this in the morning or the afternoon or the evening before you go to bed. You can take that simple step and come to the Lord and come with a heart ready to worship. I love that. Let us worship and bow down. Worship is this not just an individual event, not just something we do in private, although we can do that, and I encourage you to do that. But there's also this corporate element, this public element. Yesterday you were with the Lord's people, and perhaps you were struck by worship. Maybe it was a fervent worship, maybe it wasn't. But you joined with God's people in corporate and public worship. And why did we do that? Because God has acted very publicly. If you go through the beginning of the psalm, you see how he has acted in creation, he has acted in salvation. The last part of the psalm, he's acted in history, he's acted before his people. God has been very public. Jesus' death, his humiliation at the cross, was a public humiliation. And we are called to praise him publicly. We are called to do that. So he says, come, let us together. Notice those words, bow down in the first cola there, and then kneel in the second cola. These are in parallel. They reinforce each other. It's a posture of complete surrender, of complete subservience. When a king would conquer a nation, he would bring the leaders of that nation before him in his throne, and they would lay down in the throne before his throne, and he would step on their necks. That's the picture here. Complete subservience, complete prostrating ourselves before the Lord. Not halfway, no half-hearted devotion. There's no sense here that we are adding the Lord, our maker. Notice how he's identified here as our very source of our being, that we are somehow adding him to a list of other good things in our life. No, he is the good thing in our life. As James 1:17 says, every good and perfect thing comes down from him, from the Father of heavenly lights. He's central. He demands our exclusive worship. He demands that we come in thanksgiving and bow down and reverence him. So how do we apply this? This is interesting. Well, for one thing, I'd say that Israel had to be called to true worship again and again. This psalm is an example of that. This psalm is a call to true worship that God demands from them. So it's appropriate. We know our weakness. We know our frailty. We know how easily our heads are turned by every shiny little thing that is dangled in front of us. So the Lord in his grace and his mercy and through the work of his Spirit calls us back to himself because we need to be called back. So just as Israel was called, so you're being called today. Called through the psalmists, called through the prophets, but ultimately, brothers and sisters, you and I are called through Jesus, who Hebrews 1 and 2 says is God's final word. Jesus, God's final word, said to Satan when Satan tried to tempt him, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Let that be our anthem today. Worship the Lord our God and serve him only. Because Satan's strategy, as Jesus showed us, is to continually put idols of all kinds in our way throughout the day. Our steps are strewn with idols, and Satan is an idol maker, and our hearts are continuous idol makers. Money, sex, respect, authority, power are all things that say to us, come, bow down. Don't do it. Again, make it your resolve, make it your anthem today to hear Jesus' words and worship the Lord. Worship the Lord your God and serve him only. In terms of responding to this, today I'd say use this psalm as a pattern for prayer for yourself. As I was alluding to, just time box 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you can afford today, whatever you can afford at this moment. Just take that a block of time and say, I'm going to dedicate this to worshiping the Lord. And then worship him out of thanksgiving. Make a list, just a short list. Make 2 minutes of making a list of all that you have to be thankful for. Maybe things that are only significant for you and no one else. And then make another list of all the things why you should fear and reverence the Lord. And again, it could be things from the Bible, as we see here in this psalm, but it could be things that are just appropriate for you. Ways that you remember the Lord has chastened you, and you don't want that to happen again. You remember when words of rebuke have come into your life, and you don't want that to happen again. Make those things and worship him for both. Worship him out of thanksgiving and worship him out of fear and reverence. And just do that today, just a short period of time, whatever you can afford. God will bless it. God will receive it. Doesn't have to be elaborate. Doesn't have to be anything exuberant, really, but it should be sincere. So, brothers and sisters, worship the Lord today. Make it your anthem. You shall worship the Lord, your God, and serve him only. God bless you this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening.